Hi, boys and girls. This is a video for the third voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. You should have watched already voyages 1 and 2 at this point. And just like the other ones, I'm going to be presenting my screen so that you can read it along with me. So in our last voyage, we heard about Sinbad encountering the roc, that giant mythical bird. And he also explained part of his voyage of actually clinging on to this raw meat that was how the sailors were getting these diamonds that were all over the fields and mountains. And so he was able to escape that way. And he really added to a lot of his riches, even though he realized he shouldn't really desire any more riches. He needed to value his own life more. But we're going to get started on Voyage 3. I will present my screen now. Okay. Now this is Sinbad telling the story to Hindbad again. I soon again grew weary of living a life of idleness, and hardening myself against the thought of any danger, I embarked with some merchants on another long voyage. So he's tired of just being lazy and not having enough excitement. We touched at several ports where we traded. One day we were overtaken by a dreadful tempest, or storm, which drove us from our course. The storm continued several days and brought us before the port of an island, which the captain was very unwilling to enter, but we were obliged to cast anchor. When we had furled our sails, the captain told us that this and some other neighboring islands were inhabited by hairy savages, who would have been locals to the area, who would speedily attack us. And though they were but dwarves, we must make no resistance, for they were more in number than the locusts. And if we happened to kill one, they would all fall upon us and destroy us. We soon found that when the captain had told us that what the captain had told us was but too true. An innumerable multitude of frightful savages, about 2 feet high. So they're very short men, but they're vicious. Covered all over with red hair, came swimming toward us and encompassed our ship. They chattered as they came near, but we understood not their language. They climbed up the sides of the ship with such agility as surprised us. They took down our sails, cut the cable, and hauling to the shore, made us all get out, and afterward carried the ship into another island from whence they had come. As we advanced, we perceived at a distance a vast pile of building, and made toward it. We found it to be a palace, elegantly built and very lofty, with a gate of ebony of 2 leaves, which we opened. We saw before us a large apartment with a porch, having on one side a heap of human bones, and on the other a vast number of roasting spits. This is their way of, they were roasting people. That's what they were saying by savages. These are cannibals. We trembled at this spectacle. This is terrible. And were seized with deadly apprehension, when suddenly the gate of the apartment opened with a loud crash, and there came out the horrible figure of a black man as tall as a lofty palm tree. So this giant, he had but one eye. This is a creature that is mythical called a cyclops, who is somewhat human, but mainly he's just this giant who is at least 2 or 3 times as large as a normal human, with one eye in the middle of his forehead, where it blazed bright as a burning coal. His 4 teeth were very long and sharp and stood out of his mouth. This makes more sense, that it is this creature, a cyclops, that has been eating people as they've come to the island. And his 4 teeth were very long and sharp and stood out of his mouth, which was as deep as that of a horse. That's how big his mouth was. His upper lip hung down upon his breast. His ears resembled those of an elephant and covered his shoulders, and his nails were as long and crooked as the talons of the greatest birds. At the sight of so frightful a genie, so now we're hearing another Aladdin connection. We already heard about the roc, and now this giant is considered basically like a genie. We don't know how magical he is, though. We became insensible and lay like dead men. This is terrifying to see this huge giant who they know has been eating people. At last we came to ourselves and saw him sitting in the porch looking at us. When he had considered us well, he advanced toward us and laying his hand upon me, took me up by the nape of my neck, which is the back of my neck, and turned me around as a butcher would do a sheep's head. After having examined me and perceiving me to be so lean that I was nothing but skin and bone, he let me go. So Sinbad is thin enough that this giant Cyclops does not want to eat him. He took up all the rest one by one and viewed them in the same manner. The captain being the fattest, he held him with one hand as I would do a sparrow, and thrust his spit through him. He then kindled a great fire, roasted, and ate him, all the poor captain, in his apartment for his supper. This is a terrible creature, this Cyclops. Having finished his repast, he returned to his porch where he lay and fell asleep, snoring louder than thunder. He slept thus till morning. As for ourselves, it was not possible for us to enjoy any rest. Can you imagine? If you've seen somebody being eaten by a giant, of course you don't want to sleep. So we passed the night in the most painful apprehension. They're nervous. That can be imagined. When day appeared, the giant awoke, got up, went out, and left us in the palace. The next night, we determined to revenge ourselves on this brutish giant, and did so in the following manner. After he had again finished his inhuman supper on another of our seamen, he ate another man. He lay down on his back and fell asleep. As soon as we heard him snore, according to his custom, 9 of the boldest among us, and myself, took each of us a spit, which we've heard that multiple times, is a sharpened stick, like a spear, and putting the points of them into the fire till they were burning hot, we thrust them into the giant's eye all at once and blinded him. Now remember, he only has one eye, so this giant Cyclops is now blind. The pain made him break out into a frightful yell. He started up and stretched out his hands in order to sacrifice some of us to his rage. But we ran to such places as he could not reach. And after having sought for us in vain, he groped for the gate and went out, howling in agony. So he's wandering around, doesn't know where the people are. He's blind and just having his hands out in front of him, trying to find something or someone. We immediately left the palace and came to the shore, where with some timber or wood that lay about in great quantities, we made some rafts, each large enough to carry 3 men. We waited until day to get upon them, for we hoped, if the giant did not appear by sunrise and give over his howling, which we still heard, that he would prove to be dead. And if that happened to be the case, we resolved to stay on that island. So they're going to wait, see if he ends up dying, and then if so, go back, and not to risk our lives upon the rafts. But day had scarcely appeared when we perceived our cruel enemy with 2 others, almost of the same size, 2 more giants, leading him. Now they have sight, and a great number more coming before him at a quick pace. We did not hesitate to take to our rafts, but put to sea with all the speed we could. The giants, who perceived this, took up great stones, and running to the shore, they entered the water up to the middle, and threw so exactly that they sank all the rafts but the one I was upon. And all my companions, except the 2 with me, were drowned. We rowed with all our might and got out of the reach of the giants. But when we got out to sea, we were exposed to the mercy of the waves and winds, and spent that day and the following night under the most painful uncertainty as to our fate. But next morning, we had the good fortune to be thrown upon an island where we landed with much joy. We found some excellent fruit, which afforded us great relief and recruited our strength. At night, we went to sleep on the seashore, but were awakened by the noise of a serpent of surprising length and thickness. This is similar to in the last story, right? whose scales made a rustling noise as he wound himself along. It swallowed up one of my comrades. Another man is gone. Now it's just Sinbad and one other person left. Notwithstanding his loud cries and the efforts he made to extricate himself from it, dashing him several times against the ground, it crushed him, and we could hear it gnaw and tear the poor fellow's bones. This is terrible. Though we had fled to a considerable distance. The following day, to our great terror, we saw the serpent again, when I exclaimed, "Oh heaven, to what dangers are we exposed? We rejoiced yesterday at having escaped from the cruelty of a giant and the rage of the waves, but now are we fallen into another danger equally dreadful, and this giant snake is just as bad." As we walked about, we saw a large tall tree, upon which we designed to pass the following night for our security, and having satisfied our hunger with fruit, we mounted it accordingly. Shortly after, the serpent came hissing to the foot of the tree, raised itself up against the trunk of it, and meeting with my comrade, who sat lower than I, swallowed him at once and went off. Now, yet again, Sinbad is the only person left. I remained upon the tree till it was day, and then came down, more like a dead man than one alive, because of how frightened he is, expecting the same fate as had befallen my two companions. This filled me with horror, and I advanced some steps to throw myself into the sea. But I withstood this dictate of despair, and submitted myself to the will of God, who disposes of our lives at his pleasure. So he's starting to think, I think I'll die, but that's okay. But in the meantime, I collected together a great quantity of small wood, brambles, and dry thorns, and making them up into faggots, made a wide circle with them round the tree. He's coming up with a little fire. And also tied some of them to the branches over my head. Having done this, when the evening came, I shut myself up within the circle. It kind of looks like a little teepee or fire around him. With the melancholy satisfaction that I had neglected nothing which could preserve me from the cruel destiny with which I was threatened. The serpent failed not to come at the usual hour, and went round the tree, seeking for an opportunity to devour me, but was prevented by the rampart I had made. The rampart is like a wall or barrier. So I shouldn't have said fire before. It looks kind of like that, but it's really a wall, a barrier all around him. So that he lay till day, this is the snake, like a cat watching in vain for a mouse that has fortunately reached a place of safety. When day appeared, he retired, but I dared not leave my fort until the sun arose. Now, a little remark about this. This really shows perseverance on the side of Sinbad, to fulfill commitments and not give up or act on discouragement. This is the third voyage that we've read about him nearly dying. And even within this, he was almost killed by the giant and then almost killed by the snake, and yet he continues to fight hard for his life. He is being creative in coming up with ways to protect himself. Now God took compassion on my hopeless state, for just as I was going, in a fit of desperation, to throw myself into the sea, I perceived a ship in the distance. So he's recognizing that also God was having compassion on him. It wasn't just his cleverness that is allowing him to stay alive. I called as loud as I could, and unfolding the linen of my turban, yet again that turban comes to the rescue, displayed it like a flag waving, that they might observe me. This had the desired effect. The crew perceived me, and the captain sent his boat for me. As soon as I came on board, the merchants and seamen flocked about me to know how I came into that desert island. And after I had related to them all that had befallen me, the oldest among them said they had several times heard of the giants that dwelt on that island, and that they were cannibals, meaning those giants eat people, which we know. And as to the serpents, they added that they were abundant in the island, that they hid themselves by day and came abroad by night. After having testified their joy at my escaping so many dangers, they brought me the best of their provisions, or food, and took me before the captain who, seeing that I was in rags, gave me one of his own suits. Looking steadfastly upon him, I knew him to be the person who, on my second voyage, had left me in the island where I fell asleep, and had sailed without me or without sending seek for me. I was not surprised that he, believing me to be dead, did not recognize me. Captain, said I, look at me, and you may know that I am Sinbad, whom you left in that desert island. The captain, having considered me attentively, recognized me. God be praised, said he, embracing me. I rejoice that fortune has rectified my fault. There are your goods, which I always took care to preserve. I took them from him and made him my acknowledgments for his care of them. We continued at sea for some time, touched at several islands, and at last landed at that of Salabat, whose sandalwood is obtained, which is much used in medicine. From the Isle of Salabat, we went to another, where I furnished myself with cloves, cinnamon, and other spices. As we sailed from this island, we saw a tortoise, 20 cubits in length and breadth, a giant tortoise, or like a turtle similar. We observed also an amphibious animal. Amphibious means it dwells in water, like a cow, which gave milk. So it's like a water cow. Its skin is so hard that they usually make bucklers of it. I saw another which had the shape and color of a camel. Strange. In short, after a long voyage, I arrived at Busra, and from thence returned to Baghdad with so much wealth that I knew not its extent. I gave a great deal to the poor and bought another considerable estate, or probably a mansion. Thus Sinbad finished the history of his third voyage. He gave another 100 sequins to Sinbad and invited him to dinner again the next day to hear the fourth voyage, which is what we'll be reading tomorrow. This was possibly even more dangerous of a voyage than we'd seen before. He encounters cannibals, these giants with one eye in the middle of their head called a cyclops, and he encountered these giant snakes as well and barely got away. So we'll hear about the fourth voyage tomorrow. I hope that you're enjoying this. I know some of it is frightful. It's terrible things that are happening. I know for those of you who've read mythology, you probably hear similar things that happen to people. Now, Sinbad has shown really excellent character perseverance, and he's shown that he's not greedy. He's giving away a lot of his money. But we see, in contrast, a lot of terrible characters who are just evil in these stories, sadly. So that is the third voyage. I hope that you're enjoying it, and I will see you later. Bye, boys and girls.